Imagine, imagine for a second that you own a house. You've lived there for like 35 years.
Right.
You fix the roof after the big storm. You pave the driveway. You pay for your own private security because the neighborhood cops never show up. You even print your own currency to use at the corner store.
And to everyone walking by on the street, you are the homeowner.
Exactly. You are the homeowner. But there is a guy living 3 towns over, let's call him the legal owner, who holds the actual paper deed.
Yeah.
And because he holds that piece of paper, the bank won't talk to you, the post office pretends you don't exist, and you cannot get a loan to expand your business.
That is a surprisingly accurate, if slightly painful, analogy for this situation we are unpacking today. It's the classic Somaliland dilemma. You have a functioning state that, legally speaking, is a ghost.
It is. And usually that situation just drags on forever. It's a stalemate. But imagine you go down to your basement and you find something that looks a lot like a massive pile of gold.
Mm.
Or in this case, the critical ingredients for the global technology economy.
You suddenly have a card to play.
Right. You pick up the phone, you call the biggest power broker on the block in the United States, and you say, if you get me that deed, I will give you the keys to the basement. Exclusively.
And that is exactly where we are right now. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at a geopolitical high-stakes poker game happening right now in February 2026 in the Horn of Africa.
It's wild. We're talking about Somaliland, a breakaway region that has been functioning like a country for decades, but hasn't been recognized by the world. And just last week, they put a massive offer on the table.
It's not just an offer, though. It's a sovereignty bid.
Yeah.
We're diving into a report from Al Jazeera from February 22nd. It details this incredibly bold move by Somaliland to essentially trade rocks and real estate for a seat at the table of nations. They are offering the United States exclusive rights to their mineral resources and military bases.
We're calling this the USA factor. And we aren't just talking about a trade deal here. This is about literally rewriting the map of East Africa. But to understand why this is happening now, in 2026, we have to look at a domino that fell just a few months ago involving Israel.
Exactly. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum, it is a chain reaction. So we're going to unpack the history, the strategic drivers, and just the sheer audacity of this bidding war.
So grab your coffee, because we are about to get into a bidding competition between a country that technically doesn't exist and the global superpowers that might just make it real. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the news that dropped last week. We have this senior minister from Somaliland, Qadar Hussein Abdi. He is the minister of the presidency.
A very high-level guy.
Right. He sits down for an interview with AFP and basically looks at Washington and says, we have a deal for you. What exactly is he selling here?
He was incredibly specific, which is rare in these initial diplomatic overtures. He said, we are willing to give exclusive access to our minerals to the United States. And he didn't stop there. He added they're open to offering military bases to the U.S. as well.
I really want to pause on that word exclusive. In the world of business, that's great. But in geopolitics...
It's heavy.
Yeah, exclusive feels very heavy. It sounds less like a trade deal and more like a marriage proposal.
It is incredibly heavy. Because exclusive means you are effectively shutting out the competition. You are telling the U.S. that if you sign this paper, China doesn't get the lithium, Russia doesn't get the port access. In an era of great power competition, that is a massive carrot to dangle.
It forces the U.S. to choose, do you want these resources or do you want to leave them for your rivals?
Exactly. And the minister was pretty confident about it. He said, we believe that we will agree on something with the United States.
Which is fascinating. It's so transactional. Somaliland has realized that moral arguments for independence just haven't worked for 30 years.
No, they haven't. They've argued they're democratic, they've argued they are stable, and the world just shrugged.
So now they're pivoting to hard assets, leveraging rocks and location to buy legitimacy.
Let's talk about those rocks, actually. The report mentions lithium and coltan.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't checked the periodic table of the stock market lately, why are these specific minerals being highlighted?
Because you literally cannot run a 21st century economy without them. Lithium is the heart of every electric vehicle battery and grid storage system.
Right.
And coltan is essential for the capacitors in your phone, your laptop, and crucially, for the U.S. military guidance systems.
And right now, the supply chains for those things are, let's call them, anxiety-inducing for the West.
That is putting it mildly. China currently dominates the processing of these minerals globally. The U.S. is actively desperate to secure supply chains that don't run through Beijing.
So when Somaliland says, we have this stuff and we will give it only to you.
It rings alarm bells in the Pentagon and the Department of Energy. It's a potential solution to a massive strategic vulnerability.
But, and here's where I have to play the skeptic, it feels a bit like a used car salesman promising the engine is perfect without letting you look under the hood. Does Somaliland actually have these minerals in the quantities they claim?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question right there. And the source material from Al Jazeera includes a really critical caveat. Somaliland officials claim the abundance is there, but independent third-party verifications are lacking.
Okay, so the U.S. is being asked to burn diplomatic bridges for a resource that might not even be commercially viable.
It is a mystery box scenario. You might open it and find the next great mining boom that secures your battery supply for 50 years, or you might open it and find dirt.
Wow.
But Somaliland is betting that the fear of missing out is enough to get the U.S. to the table.
Before we get into the geopolitical headache this causes, I want to step back. We keep saying Somaliland and Somalia like they were two completely different things. But if I look at a standard UN map, it's all one color.
Right. And to understand the tension and why this offer is so controversial, we have to go back to 1991. That is the historical pivot point.
The year the Soviet Union fell, a lot of maps changed that year.
A lot of them did. And in the Horn of Africa, the Somali central government collapsed. Somalia was ruled by Siad Barre, who was a military dictator. His rule was incredibly brutal, specifically toward the north, the region we now call Somaliland.
The source mentions his forces devastated the northern region.
They bombed cities, they massacred civilians. It was a scorched earth campaign against his own people in the north. So when his government fell and the civil war began, that northern region said, "We are out. Never again."
So in 1991, they declared independence. They basically said, we are reverting to our old colonial borders.
Precisely. Because before 1960, Somaliland was a British protectorate and the South was Italian. They united in 1960, and in 1991, Somaliland essentially filed for divorce.
And since 1991, the two regions have gone on very different trajectories, right?
Drastically different. While large parts of Somalia, the South, ruled from Mogadishu, descended into warlordism, piracy, and chaos for a long time, Somaliland in the north stabilized. By the late 90s, they had a functioning government, their own currency, their own police.
That's the homeowner analogy I used earlier. They've been mowing the lawn and fixing the roof for over 35 years.
Exactly. And that stability is the core of their argument. They look at the international community and say, why are you forcing us to remain part of a chaotic state when we have been functioning peacefully on our own?
But despite that stability, no country recognized them. It was a diplomatic deep freeze until December 2025.
The massive turning point.
This is where the plot really thickens. Just a few months ago, Israel became the first and only country in the world to officially recognize Somaliland's independence.
This changed everything. It broke the seal. For decades, the international consensus was, do not touch this. It's a third rail. And Israel grabbed the rail with both hands.
And the reaction in Somaliland was massive. The report mentions residents in Hargeisa, that's the capital of Somaliland, celebrating in the streets. Their leader, Abdirahman Mohammed Abdullahi, who goes by Ciro, was praising Benjamin Netanyahu. He talked about Netanyahu's leadership and commitment to promoting stability.
Which is fascinating phrasing, because what is stability for Somaliland is seen as massive instability for Somalia. But we have to ask, why did Israel do it? Why break consensus now?
I have a feeling it has to do with geography. It's almost always geography.
Always. Look at the map. Somaliland sits right across the Gulf of Aden from Yemen. It controls the southern coast of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
And Yemen is where the Houthi rebels are.
Exactly. The Houthis have frequently attacked Israeli assets and shipping in the Red Sea to show solidarity with Palestinians. By recognizing Somaliland, Israel isn't just being nice, they're securing a strategic partner on the other side of that choke point. It's a classic encirclement strategy.
So Somaliland gets legitimacy and Israel potentially gets what? Base.
Leader Ciro had already suggested granting Israel privileged access to minerals and potentially a military presence even before this U.S. offer came up. It's a clear quid pro quo. You give us legitimacy, we give you a foothold to counter your enemies.
So Somaliland effectively sold the first VIP ticket to Israel. Now they are turning to the U.S. and saying, hey, we have passes for you too if you want in.
That is the perfect way to frame it. But while Hargeisa is celebrating, Mogadishu is furious.
I can imagine. The president of Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, did not mince words.
Not at all. He denounced Israel's recognition immediately. He called it an attack on Somalia's territorial integrity and unity. He even urged Netanyahu to withdraw the recognition.
He's not alone, right? It's not just Somalia shouting into the void.
No, and this is why the U.S. is hesitating. President Mohammed's position is backed by most African and Arab leaders. The African Union and the Arab League are generally very strict about not redrawing colonial borders because they fear it opens a Pandora's box.
Why is that fear so strong, though? You'd think they'd support self-determination.
Because if you let Somaliland secede, what about the separatists in Nigeria? What about Cameroon? What about Ethiopia? Every country in the region has ethnic fractures. The fear is that if you redraw one map in Africa, every border on the continent goes up in flames.
So if you are the U.S., you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you have a stable region offering you lithium and a place to park your jets to watch the Red Sea. On the other side, you have an angry Somalia and a whole block of African allies saying, "Don't you dare."
It is a classic dilemma of pragmatism versus diplomacy. Do you do what works, which is recognize the stable region, or do you do what is legal and support the central government? And this brings us to the Trump card.
Literally. The report mentions Donald Trump, who is the U.S. president in this 2026 timeline.
Yes. Now, historically, Trump hasn't been a fan of Somalia. The source notes he had previously lobbed insults at the country and at President Mohammed specifically.
But then in August 2025, so about 6 months ago, he changed his tune regarding Somaliland.
He did. During a White House news conference, when asked about Somaliland, he suggested he was preparing to move on the issue.
Preparing to move. That's vague, but in diplomatic speak, that is a flashing neon sign.
It signals that the door is unlocked, and that is likely why Somaliland's minister, Kadar Hussein Abdi, is coming out now in February 2026 with this exclusive offer. They are trying to push Trump through that open door.
They know Trump is transactional. They aren't appealing to his heart. They are appealing to the art of the deal. Minerals plus bases equals recognition.
Precisely. They're betting that the U.S. interest in strategic competition countering China's influence in Africa, securing supply chains for batteries, keeping a lid on the Red Sea, will outweigh the diplomatic headache of angering Mogadishu.
Okay, let's pause and really unpack the risk here. Because the minister said, we believe we will agree on something that sounds really confident. But what happens if the U.S. actually says yes? What is the fallout?
If the U.S. follows Israel's lead, it is a massive geopolitical earthquake. First, you have the immediate rupture with Somalia. President Mohammed views this as foreign interference. You push Somalia further away from the West, potentially into the arms of other powers who support their unity.
Like who?
Well, historically, countries like Turkey or Qatar have supported the central government. But also, you risk emboldening China or Russia to step in as the defenders of sovereignty in Mogadishu. You create a Cold War proxy dynamic right there in the Horn of Africa.
That's the irony, right? You secure the lithium to beat China, but you hand a geopolitical ally to China in the process.
Exactly. And then there is the risk of actual conflict. Somalia has threatened war over this. Now, their military is arguably weaker than Somaliland's, but they have proxies. They can encourage clan militias to destabilize Somaliland.
So the stable oasis the U.S. is buying into could suddenly become a war zone the moment the deal is signed.
That is the risk. You break the thing you are trying to buy.
I want to go back to the military base aspect for a second. Why does the U.S. even need another base there? They have a massive base in Djibouti right next door, Camp Lemonnier.
They do, but Djibouti is becoming very crowded. Everyone has a base there. The French, the Japanese, the Italians, and the Chinese. The Chinese naval base in Djibouti is right down the street from the American one.
That's awkward.
It's extremely awkward. If you are the U.S., do you really want your only major foothold in the regions to be within visual range of the People's Liberation Army? Somaliland offers a coastline, specifically the port of Berbera, that could be exclusively yours. No Chinese neighbors. That is strategically priceless for controlling the Red Sea.
So Somaliland is effectively saying, get away from your roommates and come live in your own house.
Perfect analogy. And they're throwing in the lithium as a housewarming gift.
But we still have to circle back to the credibility of the offer. You mentioned the lack of independent studies on the minerals. Is it possible Somaliland is bluffing?
Bluffing might be too strong a word, but optimistic projection is likely. They know there are deposits. Geologically, the region is rich. But is it enough to justify a multi-billion-dollar mining operation? We don't know. But for Somaliland, the minerals are just the bait. Even if the mines turn out to be mediocre, if they get the recognition, they win.
Because once the U.S. recognizes them, they can't unrecognize them just because the mine yield is low. It's a one-way door.
Correct. Once you say you are a country, that is it. You can't take it back without looking ridiculous.
This feels like a moment where the old rules of international relations are just breaking down. We used to care about sovereignty and territorial integrity above all else. Now it feels like we are moving toward a world of a la carte sovereignty. If you have the goods, you get the flag.
We are seeing a shift from a rules-based order to an interest-based order. The Cold War froze borders in place. Now the ice is melting. If Somaliland pulls this off, it sends a message to every separatist movement with natural resources. Find a patron, offer a deal, get your state.
It's a fascinating pivot. Usually we talk about aid flowing to these regions, but here Somaliland is the one holding the chips. They are the ones asserting power.
It's a total inversion of the typical dynamic, and it shows just how desperate they are to finalize this divorce from Somalia. They are willing to mortgage their future resources just to get that certificate of divorce.
What stands out to me is the timeline. Israel in December 2025, this offer in February 2026, things are moving so fast.
They are, and notice the silence from the rest of the world. The EU, the UK, they are just watching. If the US moves, the floodgates might open. If the US stays put out, Israel might remain the outlier.
So if you are sitting in the White House right now reading this report from Al Jazeera, what is the conversation in the Situation Room?
The conversation is a battle between timelines.
Yeah.
The State Department is likely saying, don't do it. The long-term diplomatic cost with the African Union is too high. The Pentagon and the Department of Energy are saying, we need the access now to secure the battery supply chain and check the Houthis.
And the decision likely comes down to how much the U.S. fears losing the Horn of Africa to rivals versus how much it fears upsetting the status quo.
And don't forget the Israel factor. If the U.S. stays out, Israel is out there alone. The U.S. usually doesn't like leaving its key ally isolated on a diplomatic limb. That adds pressure to join them.
It is wild to think that a decision made in Jerusalem in December 2025 is forcing a decision in Washington in 2026, all over a strip of land that hasn't been legally recognized since 1991.
It shows how interconnected the system is. You pull a thread in the Levant, and it unravels a sweater in the Horn of Africa.
Let's recap what we have learned in this deep dive.
We have Somaliland, a region that has been effectively independent but unrecognized since 1991. They stabilized while their neighbor Somalia struggled.
Then in December 2025, Israel shocks everyone by recognizing Somaliland, likely to secure a buffer against threats in Yemen.
Now, in February 2026, emboldened by that win, Somaliland is offering the United States exclusive access to lithium, coltan, and military bases in exchange for U.S. recognition.
Somalia is furious, viewing this as theft of their land. The U.S., under President Trump, is considering the move, balancing the strategic gains against the diplomatic fallout with the rest of Africa.
And the risk remains that we don't even know for sure if the minerals are there in the quantities claimed. It is a high-stakes gamble on all sides.
This connects so well to our previous deep dives on resource diplomacy. It's the same story, just a completely different map.
And it sets the stage for what we need to watch next. How will the African Union respond if the U.S. actually takes the meeting? That is the next domino.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought. We talk a lot about international law and sovereignty as if they are solid, unmovable things, like gravity.
But they aren't.
Exactly. If a region functions as a state, if it has an army, a currency, and cuts international trade deals, at what point does the lack of official recognition become the fiction? At what point is the world pretending something isn't real when it clearly is? And is the promise of exclusive minerals the only thing strong enough to break that fiction?
That is the exact question that keeps diplomats up at night.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be watching the Horn of Africa closely to see if this deal goes through.
Until next time.
See you, Bam.